maybe at some point we should talk about who the bull slayer is. I don't
Oh,
want this to
let's
go by
do that.
with.
Okay,
Let's,
sure.
I don't want this to go by without a little
Absolutely.
explanation of the title. If
Okay.
I don't know if viewers are going to be able to see that very clearly,
Mm-hmm.
but the bull slayer is the god Mithras,
Mm-hmm.
who is always depicted as a handsome young man wearing a cloak and what was called a Phrygian cap, a kind of a tasseled cap,
Mm-hmm.
sitting astride a bull, pulling its head back by the nostrils and stabbing it in the throat.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a sacrifice which had great religious significance. And the cult of Mithras, originating in the East, in Persia,
Mm-hmm.
spread all over the Roman Empire. We find these Mithraic caverns as far afield as Germany, Britain,
Uh-huh.
in Rome.
Wow.
Very quickly in the course of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries BC, this became one of the most popular cults in the Roman Empire, regarded with great hostility by Christians, who considered it a kind of blasphemous imitation of their own religion, because Mithras is the sun god, and the birthday of the unconquered sun is the winter solstice, which is pretty much simultaneous with Christmas. And the sacrifice of the bull, the blood of the bull, is reminiscent of the blood of the lamb, of the Paschal sacrifice. Christians considered this a diabolical cult because it was so popular and in certain ways touched so closely on their own religion. Finally, by the 4th, 5th centuries AD, Christianity got the upper hand and Mithraism died out. What we have
but
now,
this was a very strong
we
cult
have
at the
a
time.
lot of archaeological remains. What we don't have is the liturgy. What we don't have is the written theology, because Christians were very careful to stamp all that out. So we don't have it. So what we don't know about this cult is a lot more than what we do know. But
Right.
I wanted to work with this also just because it interested me so much. So without giving anything away, this is very pertinent to the mystery.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and I hadn't realized that it was as pervasive as it was.
Well, at the time that this story happens, it's just beginning, and
Okay.
Pliny has not heard of it before.
Yeah.
100 years later, everybody had heard of it.
Okay. And in fact, the group's Christianity was at the time of this story was still a small group. I mean, they were by no means.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some group that people had heard of, but it certainly did not have.
And
big following.
Pliny, in one of his famous letters that people analyze to this day, had a run-in with them too.
There's a small earthquake that takes place that results in some fires, and there's not really any way to put out the fire. Can you tell us about that? The fire brigades were basically outlawed?
This was unique to this province. Trajan was so worried about rebellion and sedition in this province that he outlawed all voluntary associations, including voluntary fire brigades. And we have a letter, and this is true, we have a letter from Pliny to Trajan saying, we've just had an earthquake here and a fire, and I had no way to deal with it. Couldn't we, let me create a fire brigade. I promise you they won't get out of hand. We'll make sure that it doesn't turn into a political club. And Trajan writes back, it's absolutely not.
Really?
These things always turn into political clubs, and we simply cannot have that in this province. So that's
was that true in that time period? I mean,
it was true of Bithynia. It wasn't true generally in the empire, but Bithynia was in such a state of turmoil that Trajan felt that even something as innocent as a volunteer fire brigade was too dangerous.
Interesting. Calpurnia is trying to sort of assimilate into the culture of her new home. She holds a luncheon for some of the leading women, the wives of some of the leading men, I should say. None of the women were leaders. How comfortable is she in her role? Because she, as the governor's wife, she's kind of supposed to be setting the tone.
Well, she's not comfortable, and this is what the subplot revolves around. She is a beautiful, accomplished young woman, but in herself, she has never grown into that role. She, as she says to her, she is still, in a sense, that frightened 14-year-old girl who, as a new bride from the sticks, was brought into Pliny's household and had to grow up very fast. And in a way, she feels that she never has. She feels that that she isn't big enough to fill this role. And the other Roman wives, the wives of the other officials, we don't know anything about them. I made them all up. But my model, what I was thinking of, is really kind of the British memsahibs in colonial India. You know, status conscious, their status being whatever their husband's status was, jealous of each other. And I wanted to create that kind of sort of snake pit environment and plunge poor Calpurnia in it, and who doesn't feel that she can cope with this, which is what leads her into what she does.
Right, right, exactly. That part we won't give away, but however, but it does sort of set the tone for this kind of a somewhat lonely young woman who, at that kind of the position that she has, really, by definition, means she can't really have any real friends.
Right, right, and really her only friend is her maidservant, which turns out to be not a good idea.
Yeah.
Right, she feels abandoned, she feels lonely. Pliny is off touring the province, trying to put out the fires, dealing with everything, and just in the most sublimely complacent way, just so certain that, of course, Calpurnia can deal with all of this, but in fact, she's not dealing with it.
Right. Well, as the book opens, I mean, they seem to have a very loving relationship, which is also pretty, I think, pretty rare for that time period.
Absolutely. I mean, Pliny's love letters to her are unexampled in ancient literature. There's nothing else like it. The epigraph that opens the book is a quotation from one of them. She puts my poems to music and performs them on the lyre with no teacher but love itself. And he tells us that she would, I mean, one laughs, but she would sleep with copies of his speeches beside her in the bed when he had to be away. Now, there's nothing like this in all of ancient literature. Trust me, you know. This is so unusual.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I have to tell you that we are out of time.
Oh, my goodness.
But I know it does pass fast. Thank you. You've been watching Behind the Pages from the staff of 22 City View. I'm Diane Goshgarian. And that, the time really passed fast.
Absolutely. I thought, oh, my goodness.
Yeah, really. What are we going to say for the rest?